first form of higher life. And the pictograph of the vampire squid or vampire bat, which is one of the remaining deities of the deep that still exist in today's world, almost unchanged from 330 million years ago, and then perhaps billions of years, those vampire bats and vampire squids with the most complex ganglia that led from their spinal apparatus to their eye, when they had a 6-inch eye, those ganglia went from one-celled creatures in the oceans to multi-celled creatures with a 6-inch eye, having the most complex ganglia, not just in prehistoric times, but in today's times. And these are some of the things that Norm Tolson made us aware of while he was teaching metaphysics, parapsychology, at the address of 333 East 79th Street, right off First Avenue. And then eventually his apartment moved over to 444 East 79th Street right off First Avenue, and that was where Norm Tolson explained to me about the possibility of the mind expanding its consciousness into a reality that few people will ever understand. And he only took in 4 students. Eventually he took in 2 more, both of them women, and one he took in because she was in fact a real Wiccan witch. She was into Wiccan and she was a witch. And one because she had had a psychic experience the girl's name was Freddie, who became my friend and Norm's friend. And at the age of 25, Norm and Freddie hooked up and had a beautiful daughter named Marla. And Marla, who was born in 1979, I believe, we still say hello to each other once in a while on the net, but Marla was the end result of the psychic connection that Freddie and Norm had, and we remained friends throughout the years. And Norm died at a ripe old age, and we lost track of each other when he moved to California, but Freddie and I have still remained friends. They had lived in different parts of the country towards the end of their relationship. But either way, Norm Tolson worked at Los Alamos facility, and he worked with the top scientists, and he was one of the first people to be placed in Los Alamos to do the choreography for the creation of not only the nuclear weapons that we murdered other people's children and families with, for a good cause or not, because the war could have probably been prevented. But Norm was part and parcel of the creation of the first atomic bomb. And he explained to me that not only from a metaphysical point of view did the universe not exist as we were being taught, but from the point of view of actual science, the universe does not exist as they teach in the so-called scholarly institutions that exist in this planet. Because while Norm was working at Los Alamos, one of the things that happened on a regular basis was that they had what was known as heavy water facilities that were tanks that were lead-lined and made of steel, and not inches thick, but in fact, when they didn't know what type of shielding they needed, some of the shielding was a foot thick of 3 or 4 inches of lead and steel, and then they had these vats of water that they had what small amounts of nuclear fissionable material they had, and that's where they stored it. However, what he also explained to me was that during the course of these learning experiences that was happening and occurring at Los Alamos. During the course of these learning experiences, in the learning curve, they learned a lot more than that they lead us to believe, because one of the things that they learned was that sometimes, for no apparent reason, well, they didn't know what the reason was. Sometimes, at no apparent reason, the nuclear energy would, what they call phase, F-P-H-A-S-E, it would phase, as the Ark of the Covenant is the transformer of the phasing of energy from this thing that we perceive to be God, and is in fact God, but the energy that came from the nuclear reactors, or nuclear testing bubbles, would phase, and there would be a 2 or 3 foot wall, solid concrete and steel doors, blast doors, in case there was an accident. The room was hermetically sealed off, and they would walk outside the room and close these 2 or 3 foot thick doors, and what would happen is that the people that were on the other side of 2 or 3 or 4 foot of solid concrete would become visible from through the solid concrete, lead, and steel walls. And not only would the walls become transparent because they phased, but in fact, what would happen is you would be able to hear their voices at the same time. And while this phasing was taking place, almost like the flickering of a television set, sometimes it would stay phased for 1 or 2 seconds, and you would be able to see the people through what was 1 or 2 or 3 feet of concrete and steel. And when you could see the people, you could hear them as if there was nothing between you and that person, when in reality there was 2 or 3 feet of steel and concrete. And these are the things that Norm Tolson explained to me. Now, Norm might be able to be found as associated with as one of the first people that worked with high-speed photography, because when the valve systems and the processes that were utilized to create the atomic weapon, including the injection of different types of gases, different pressurizations of the shell for the atomic detonator, and the implosive device that they created to explode inward to compress the molecules in order to create an uncontrolled nuclear reaction. When they were creating these things, and also during that time at Los Alamos, there was the necessary need to create higher speed cameras in order to take pictures of valve systems for the what was starting to be the process of building high-speed aircraft, and even the beginning of the jet engine age. Norm would take cameras that had 10 frames per second and sync them up into 50 frames per second. And then Norm, when they created a camera that had 50 frames per second, Norm would create a camera with 10 50-frame cameras per second and make a 500-frame camera per second. And then once they perfected that, they would go on as many cameras as they could get the picture and make the camera. They would sync these cameras up. So in theory, my friend Norm Tolson was one of the people that invented high-speed photography. So this man was no slouch, and what he taught us was how to utilize what's inside our minds to expand our consciousness. Now that's a pretty scary thing, because what I discovered, aka all of these pictographs that exist on the obverse and reverse of the $1 bill, is a discovery, especially considering that the Ark of the Covenant, there is a depiction of the Ark of the Covenant on the reverse of the $1 bill. And a brief synopsis of my discovery about this pictograph is that if there were if this happened in 1934, and if I am correct about this being an exact replica to scale of the Ark of the Covenant, if I'm correct about that, that means that 30 billion peoples that have existed since 1934 on the planet Earth, let's just take a random number of 30 billion, could be less, but let's take a random number, 30 billion people had the ability to see this picture on the reverse of the $1 bill. 30 billion people had the ability to see it. No one ever saw the pictograph of the Indian chief except Michael Fazio. No one ever saw the fact that it's an exact replica of the Ark of the Covenant, complete with the Lord God's first commandment on it. No one ever saw it. So let's just take it as it's a fact, and that all of these pictographs that you see before you will go down in the course of history as prophetic in nature. I don't know what the right word is. I don't know what I did. I don't even know why I did it. I was just compelled to do it. But let's take the fact that this existed. Let's say that this is real. Let's say it's real, and let's say it's not real, and let's say it's real. Because if it's real, that means that Michael Fazio